Hello, Baker Economics students. We are now in week 6, so congratulations. We are almost wrapping up the course. So I just want to say that I really enjoyed working with you all this past 6 weeks. It goes so quickly in these courses, but I think you all have a greater appreciation and understanding of the role of economics to both personal and global and national situations. And with the election coming up here and very quickly after our course ends, you're going to see kind of a ripple effects depending on the election results. And some people are already kind of pricing in markets or trying to determine which way or pass relative to stuff that we'll look at this week with probably more so fiscal policy than monetary policy, because monetary policy is supposed to be independent, but it may be slightly influenced at times, depending on who the president appoints in that position. So, but anyway, for the last week, just continue to do what you're doing. The forum discussion posts, jump in there early. I'll try to get in there and post to you too. You'll wrap up with your final quiz and then your final homework. And then I'll try to make sure to have everything posted by Sunday, by midnight, end of the course. And I usually get grades posted probably by Tuesday, by the time the course ends, because most of it's already calculated all within Moodle. So you should know pretty quickly. And I'll get that posted for you, because I know that some people depend on that and sometimes for reimbursement. So anyway, for this week, we're going to do a continuation, but much more detailed into fiscal and monetary policy. First, with just the fiscal side, the idea like the federal budget. Obviously, the government takes in from the federal side so much in taxes, mostly through individual taxes, but there are also federal corporate taxes. And then it has expenditures. You know, if every time that you do your taxes, if you ever looked at the pamphlet from the tax books, it always gives a pie chart of the breakdown of the different things that the government spends money on. And some of those are, non-discretionary, such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. There's food programs, and then we have discretionary programs, for example, like the military or highways. And actually, for the U.S., the amount of money that we spend on military spending, we are one of the largest ones, the percentage of the economy in the world. So it's often been a debate: is that the best way to utilize our resources? It doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but it's just, does this add value in the long run to the economy? And how should we be allocating those resources? Those are the questions that need to be asked. So, but you're going to read about things like the idea of transfer payments. Transfer payments is an example that you receive something like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment, food stamps, with not actual work being done. So it doesn't necessarily, once you understand, it doesn't contribute to gross domestic product. It's like I'm giving you money without doing any production of a good or service. And the way that we pay for the shortfalls expenditures over the collection of tax revenues is by issuing debt. And that's through Treasury bills that go up to 1 year, Treasury notes that go up to 10 years, and Treasury bonds that go up to 30 years. So the bills are sold at a discount and from the face value, and the notes and the bonds are then sold on principal amount, and then they pay interest every 6 months. And it's kind of, in finance, it's kind of determined or defined as like the risk-free rate, because the government really can't default on a bond, just like Ford or somebody else or GE may default on that bond. So they can always print more money. It just is an inflation tax, but it's just kind of the reality of how it is. So you're going to read a little bit about how the budget is developed, that time period, the decisions about how funds are going to be allocated. Often, potentially sometimes lately in the past decade, has been caused government shutdowns and disagreements about how the government will be funding or to increase debt in order to keep us going. And then you'll also read about automatic stabilizers. I believe you've mentioned these before, but these can be simple things, just like an employment insurance. Our current tax system, our current tax system, individual tax system, is a progressive system. So it says that you earn more, that you will be taxed more. And as you earn less, it gives you more income. And that's one of the interesting things, and I think especially we'll be after the presidential election is what will the new tax policies look like. So that's kind of piqued the interest for both individuals and corporations, because corporations did directly see their taxes dropped. They did that in order to make them kind of, the argument was that we were one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, to make us more competitive and not having less companies go overseas and locate to Ireland and other places like that. But regardless, if you're going to provide any goods or services, you have to have a way to figure out to pay for them. And if you're not collecting enough in revenues, you have to issue more debt. And as long as people are willing to buy that debt, then you can continue those expenditures. So the textbooks are also going to talk about some of the debate related to that, because with both the fiscal policy, let's give an example like Social Security that says if you want to continue these in the future, and as more and more Americans are aging, and one thing I want you to understand about the Social Security Trust Fund, it's not like the stockpile of money that's sitting there in a bank. That's not how the government works. The government takes in revenues and then they expend all those revenues. So it's not like there's this account on hold that we're saving up money for Social Security. It's just kind of a bucket owed to potential future generations. So if we want to continue to pay out of that bucket, you either have to increase Social Security taxes in the future. Right now, I think we pay, I think it's 7.62% or something like 7.65%. I believe it's, so, that's a matched tax by your employer. I think it's like 6.4 that you pay. And then the other difference, like a 1.45 or something like that. I'm trying to remember the exact details, but for disability. So you pay it and the employer pays it, and you pay it up to a certain dollar amount. And after that dollar amount is reached, you no longer pay that tax. But that's been some proposals that, will we have to increase that tax? Or if we don't want to increase it, then what that means is that at some point a decision does have to be made that people get less of a benefit, or they have to wait longer to receive those benefits. So, and actually I'll just give you a little tidbit here. If you go to Social Security, there's something called a quick calculator. Highly advise you to look at it. It just gives you an estimate of what your benefits will be when you retire based on today's values, and you can also look at real term. It will say based on inflated dollars. So okay, but you're going to look in more detail about this, about some supply side economics. It's kind of interesting too, because this kind of goes back to the Reagan era, and you might argue that the Kansas side with Brownback didn't quite get this right. The idea in theory is that if you lower taxes for everyone, it will produce more, and we'll get to that potential output of GDP. On the Kansas side, I think it was based on state, but the state was probably already at the level of output, and it just had a shortfall for a lot of their schools. They had to cut back on expenditures on the high schools, the grade schools, and everything else because there weren't enough revenues. So anyway, from the federal level, though, there's something we call crowding out that says if I'm winning all these expenditures through the federal government and I don't have enough money in tax revenue, what I may have to do is go out and borrow. And if I have to borrow, I may have to give rates that are competitive compared to the private sector, say somebody like Ford that's trying to issue a bond. And I'm making a decision whether to go with the Ford bond or the government bond, which was guaranteed. Well, you may actually crowd out private investment. So we go back to that aggregate expenditures approach. Think about C plus I plus G plus net exports. It says although you're trying to stimulate aggregate demand by increasing G, what you're doing is actually you're shifting in I from the private sector. So it may have the opposite effect. So there may be partial crowding out, and full crowding out would say that there's no change in real GDP because you've crowded out all the private investment that would happen. So, all right, last thing, just kind of wrap up quickly, just the monetary policy. We've talked about this quite a bit already in previous weeks, but just kind of a refresher on this. The main goal is to stabilize prices and maximize employment. It's not an easy task. You're trying to balance those things. The Fed does that primarily through the Fed funds market. It's not that they go out and they tell banks you now charge this interest rate. They do that through controlling the money supply. And many years ago, when I first got out of graduate school, 25 plus years ago, I was a Fed funds trader. So my goal was to try to get a rate better than the average Fed funds rate so I can improve my return to the credit union holders. So I'd start the day off with like $8 billion and I'd sell it like $50 million, $100 million in chunks. And really what we were doing is we were just giving overnight loans. And that's really what Fed funds rates is. It's overnight loans to other banks in order for them to meet their reserve requirements. But if the Fed pumps up the money supply, because they hold a lot of treasury bills and notes, and they can influence that through the buying and selling through open market rations, they can influence the general interest rates and the long-term rates. In fact, I'd encourage you to go back to look at the Treasury yield curve. I may put that out there this week. I can remember it. But the idea again is that these shifts in the money supply, if it's expansionary monetary policy, will drive interest rates down to try to stimulate any of those C plus I, impacts the net exports. But if it's contractionary, I'm actually going to shrink the money supply to push the interest rates back up, and that might be a way also to fight off inflation. But you'll read about those rules with inflation. One of them is a Taylor rule, for example. But there's been a lot of criticism in the past whether the Fed has waited too long to raise interest rates or didn't move interest rates to lower levels soon enough. But we've had such low interest rates for a long time. It's probably going to be that way for at least the next couple of years because of the COVID-19 crisis. So, well, those are some general insights. But again, if you have any questions, do reach out to me. More than happy willing to meet via Zoom too. If you ever want to do that, just let me know. But otherwise, have a great week, and I look forward to talking to you online. Take care.